2019, we are all witnesses to changes in geopolitics, technologies, and society. They say both uncertainty and expectation can be the spice of life, and it's but human nature to be curious, if not anxious, about what's coming. In our year-end special, Braving Uncertainty, let's reflect and get re-energized.
And here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight on CGTN. On the last day of 2019, we bring you our special program for the year, Braving Uncertainties. In today's program, we will first examine the perfect storms that strain the global economic ties and divide the nations. In the second half, we turn to solutions, innovations, and advances that give us the hope, hopefully, riding into 2020. First up, the perfect storm. We begin with the toss-up between the world's two largest economies, the China-U.S. trade war, some say. While Phase 1 deal is in the pipeline, the two sides remain on turbulent terms. 2019 has been a year of setbacks that leave the rest of the world caught in between.
2019 should have been a year of celebration for China and the United States.
And to establish
it marked the
diplomatic
40th anniversary of diplomatic relations.
First.
But the clouds of a trade war overshadowed it all. The Trump administration slapped tariffs on nearly half of all Chinese imports in 2018. In response, China taxed almost all inbound American goods. Throughout 2019, hopes for a truce became dashed as new rounds of levies came into force. By the end of the year, average tariffs had surpassed 20% for both Chinese and American exporters, a sharp rise compared to pre-trade war rates.
We estimate that the U.S.-China trade tensions will cumulatively reduce the level of global GDP by 0.8% by 2020.
In America, there is a groundswell of pleas to end tit-for-tat escalations.
Every time one of these things hits, we take a hit and then consumers take a hit.
In the middle of it all, President Xi and U.S. President Trump reaffirmed their willingness to work things out during a face-to-face meeting in June. And top officials from both countries flew across the Pacific 9 times in 2019 to negotiate. Finally, the 13th round produced a deal. The two countries agreed to cut in U.S. tariffs and buy more of each other's agricultural products. The news was a shot of confidence, even if it was only a Phase 1 deal yet to be signed. As we welcome 2020, the world eagerly awaits for more.
And I'm joined by Cui Tiankai, the Chinese ambassador to the United States. Ambassador Cui, welcome to CGTN. First of all, 2019, 40th anniversary of China-U.S. relations, and yet this year we've seen a bumpy ride, not necessarily a collective celebration. What do you make of the past year?
You see, the two presidents have agreed between them that we should work together to build a relationship based on coordination, cooperation, and stability. And this is the goal set by the two heads of state. Of course, we are not quite there. And you see, by definition, a goal is something you have to work towards. It's not what you already have in hand. So we'll continue our efforts to make progress toward that goal, and eventually we'll be there. You see, I have learned in my years here in the United States that when you talk about America, when you talk about how American people think or feel about something, don't focus just on Washington. You have to look at the 50 states. You have to look at the American people. I think there's still very strong and widespread support among the American people for a better and more stable China-U.S. relationship. And there are different voices here.
Mr. Ambassador, give us some thoughts about what's likely to be happening with Phase 2.
I think we have full confidence in our negotiators. So let the two teams do their job. And still, they are under the guidance of the two presidents. And they are working in the interests of both countries. So let's wish them great success.
Now a new year is coming. I wonder what is your best wishes and hope that you can share with our viewers around the world?
I'm doing my small part for my country and my people and for the relation between China and the United States. In the new year, I will certainly continue to do that. I know we in China, we are always hardworking people. So with our joint efforts, we will make our country better. We will make our nation better. We will be able to achieve and realize the Chinese dream. So let's work together for that.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Cui Tiankai, for your best wishes. Best wishes to you back as well, Mr. Ambassador, and Happy New Year to you as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
In the shifting geopolitical landscape, the role between China and the U.S. is only one of the many brewing uncertainties. Despite headline-grabbing meetings between President Trump and Mr. Kim Jong-un, the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is stalled. In Europe, the almost four-year-old Brexit drama is a thorn in the European Union, which is struggling with the rise of populist leaders. But multilateral diplomatic efforts went on, as seen with the recent trilateral meeting among leaders of China, Japan, and South Korea. There is still willingness to pursue regional cooperation. What has geopolitics got to do with this? Some answers. Both joining us in our Beijing studio, we have Wang Hui, a professor from Tsinghua Institute for Advanced Studies in Humanities and Social Sciences. Meanwhile, we also have Frank Ziehen, who is a bestseller author, journalist, and documentary filmmaker. Good to see both of you on the eve of the new year. But about what are we experiencing right now? The Chinese ambassador earlier talked about the real strengths between China and the United States to deal with the issues. But to you, what does this strength mean, whether it is still existing today? Professor Wang.
So-called trade war, whether or not we name it or in this way or another way, now we suspend it, but not find the final solution. We still, it's uncertainty in the next year. These issues not only happen between China and America. For example, your country or EU, what kind of position they can play, what kind of the role they can play in not only between China and America, but also the global order. For example, Sino-European relations improved to extent.
Yes, but it's different even from a European position, because we are so used to set the global rules, and now we are feeling that we are going to lose power every day because there are all these emerging countries. It's not only China, it's India, it's Southeast Asian countries, it's even Africa.
So here's the thing, what's going to drive the policy? Is the fear of losing going to drive the policy, or is the energy of engaging to the changes that's likely to drive the policy? That's the real thing, isn't it?
I hope at the end it will be the energy of engaging, but the first reaction is the fear if you lose something. That's very normal.
How long do you think that would last? Do you think there's enough
if I would know, I wouldn't sit here.
Do you think there will be enough internal debate also about that?
I don't think there's enough internal debate in Europe and in Germany. It's just starting now.
The economy develops with its own logic. Is it fair to ask that, Professor Wang, that China, please don't develop too fast, otherwise we cannot catch up with you, otherwise we feel disadvantaged, otherwise we don't feel comfortable? Should China develop in a way or a timetable that others designed or feel comfy about China?
No, it is unfair and not possible. First of all, Chinese rise, I think, is by the efforts of Chinese people for long decades. Second, I think it's also the global transformation, result of the global transformation. I think that Germany, for example, and the European countries benefit so much. You have the automobile industry, so much depends on the Chinese market. And also in that sense, we are really on the same boat. However, we feel that, especially I understand that from the Western perspective, that it's a kind of a new order. Were not so comfortable to have that kind of.
It was easier before.
Privileged position
but
that they are losing. But I think that the rise of China, rise of Japan, rise India, and even some Africa and Latin American countries. It's inevitable.
Yeah, but just because China is emerging, it's changing it. It can't help it. Yeah,
And
if you become more powerful and you have different ideas.
It's because China is rising and therefore the U.S. has to withdraw from all the international treaties and international platforms, which the Europeans are also against?
No, we need to find a new common ground.
China's rising,
yes.
It seems that what Professor Wang, to me, is trying to argue is only part of the story. The other part of the story is how the others are going to deal with it in a matured way. Now, that's probably the issue.
We had a certain way of development, and we were, in the West, basically, we were the only player, if you put America and Europe together, and now new players are coming.
Is there a way to deal with it after advising China?
We need to talk to each other.
Okay.
We need to talk to each other, much more than we do now.
Yeah, but on the other hand, those newcomers rise because they follow the logic or the rules of that the Western made to a great extent.
I'm not sure.
In many ways.
In many ways they don't follow it.
No, it's a changing the order. I mean, substantially.
Because you have a different history.
Changing the order substantially, but that order was from the beginning. Was the Western order to some extent.
For example, a globalized world.
Yeah, but then there would be no differences. But there are differences. Because China is doing things in a different way, has a different idea of global values than the West has. And this is a thing we have to discuss, and we have to sit together and find a way.
I'm not sure when you say the West, it's really as the West, because as you know,
no, and China is not
France,
China.
A huge difference.
Yes.
European countries, Central European, Western European, huge
but
differences.
Still, there's a common ground of values.
The US also.
I would still say there's a big common ground of values in the Western countries, in America and in Europe. And probably a bigger common ground between America and Europe than between Europe and China. Probably it's going to change.
Yeah. We do not know about that question. I want to have a final word before we wrap up this round of discussion. Okay. What do you think when we look at the 2020 about the geopolitics and the bigger implications of geopolitics?
The continuing change, the order, but facing the more and more, maybe even intensification of the conflicts.
Interesting. Yeah. Frank, Mr. Zhang?
Yes, I do agree. I'm always saying the last 20 years, lots of changes happened in China, but it was only basically a keeping up, a modernization. Now China starts to be very innovative, and this becomes more difficult on a world order.
All right. Stay with us. We're going to continue our discussion about many other aspects, for example, about the economic system and technological part of our world. Stay with us, and we'll be back after this. While the world grapples with geopolitical storms, domestic unrest in many countries shows no signs of fizzling out, pushing the year 2019 into a maelstrom of uncertainties. They unveil the deep-seated social problems fueling the protests. What started off in Hong Kong as peaceful marches against a bill has morphed into the biggest, most violent movement the city has ever seen in decades. Now let's take a look back at where it all started and zero in on key events in 2019 that unfolded in Hong Kong.
The same kind of the person like 6 months ago. And I think that the situation is the same among the new generation of Hong Kong.
the government will formally withdraw the bill in order to fully allay public concerns.
One of those who stood his ground no matter what is Hong Kong SAR Legislative Council member Ho Kwan-yeol. He is a lightning rod of controversy as a self-styled, outspoken, patriotic politician. A target, certainly, of radical forces, Mr. Ho was stabbed while on the campaign trail in November. Earlier, in a one-on-one interview with Mr. Ho, he painted a full picture of the protest origins and handlers. Mr. Ho, welcome to CGTN. You failed in the recent election. Tell me about your reaction to that.
Yes, I failed to gain the seat and to be re-elected last time. The thing that surrounding the district council election, well, that before it happened, we had already gone through almost half a year riotous moments, a lot of demonstrations, and even riots happened. People were attacked, including myself, when I was doing my street stations to lobby for the support. So all these were not desirable. In fact, law-breaking events happening every day, almost every day, leading up to the election day itself.
But here, in Beijing, when you were attending one of those conferences, you became a star and a hero, certainly. How do you see the different reactions coming from mainland and also from Hong Kong about you also?
Yeah, it is quite a stark difference between Hong Kong and the mainland. I guess my ordeal, which had been vividly witnessed by the viewers, my friends on the mainland, had received, well, offered me a lot of sympathy and also support. And in fact, the situation in Hong Kong is quite the other way around. We had a very clear division in the public views, in the public opinions. Either you support or become or being patriotic or not patriotic. So the difference, the political difference and the stance in Hong Kong is so divided. Nevertheless, as I've just said that many times before, the things happen in Hong Kong is not just a simple matter starting from internal. It was also affected by some other foreign influence and foreign factors. So I would put it in the same term, it is and still ongoing a color code revolution. We had also seen some other foreigners, strangers, mingling with the rioters and also the demonstrators at the streets. They were not journalists. Why were they there? And in fact, we had also seen a picture which was so clear that to show that this stranger was teaching and demonstrating to another young guy how to set fire, be an arsonist. So that was also a glaring evidence that we've seen.
You have a very clear pro-Beijing label in Hong Kong politically.
Yeah, if you put it that way, it's a pro-Beijing. In fact, I think I am a Chinese, so it's not just a pro-Beijing with that narrow definition. I'm a Chinese, a patriotic Chinese.
Did you recover from the stabbing wound?
Fully.
Fully?
Yeah.
Is there still a mark?
A scar on my chest.
Across the world, similar stories also unfolding. we saw a surge in mass protests in both developed and developing countries, showing no sign of a breather. Yellow Vest protesters took to the streets of France over social inequality. Deadly clashes erupted in India against a new citizenship law, and demonstrations in Chile prompted the cancellation of the APEC summit. A domino effect, some say, sending chills around the world. While protests have different methods and goals, and it comes with different historical backgrounds, there are similar causes that connect them. So what are the causes? Once again, we are joined in the studio by Professor Wang Hui and Mr. Frank Ziehen. Gentlemen, we've seen the phenomenon, the symptoms. But what's behind the symptoms, probably even more important. Mr. Ziehen, I want to go to you first. You see strikes, demonstrations, cancellation of important international events here and there become hotspot issues. But what's really behind it from your perspective?
Yeah, there are different reasons behind the different ways of demonstrations. In Hong Kong, it's a strange mix of people. There are a lot of economic problems because people can't pay their housing anymore, and Hong Kong is very small, and people are in some way afraid of this big China. And these two things are coming together, and then you have demonstrations. In the other part of the world, it's the same thing. It's in France, you had these big demonstrations. In Spain, you had Catalonia who wanted to be separate. This is always about being people being unhappy about something, and it's actually the politicians. They have to make sure that these people are not becoming so unhappy that they go on the streets and they start protesting, and they're even getting violent.
Every of the issues we just mentioned, whether it's in our background or by you, has their own root causes, of course. They're very different in cultural aspect and also historical context. But Professor Wang, since you are a scholar, been studying capitalism for some time, it is also one of the arguments that at this stage of capitalism development, when new technologies are coming and challenging the original roles that human beings play, and there will be sharper conflict apparently existing, Professor.
Yeah, I think that I agree with that. Different reasons behind the different demonstration, different unrests, but some commonalities maybe, some roughly speaking. The first of all, traditional political framework was less responsible or the responsive to the social issues that in the everyday life. So they allow the accumulation of contradiction, develop to the certain point, suddenly burst out. So this is the one that what I label it as a collapse of the representativeness or the collapse of the representation, meaning that the whole framework of the political system lack the capacity to be responsive to those social stratas. That's quite universal to some extent. And the traditional media also fail to catch up the new development, the speed, also the size. So in that sense, means that the crisis of public sphere, because public space itself in crisis. People feel because the public opinion is not expressed in those areas.
Exactly.
So these are other the sides. Third one, the phenomena is that I think that we can find a lot of the roots of those crises. For example, you mentioned that the education, the social differentiation, housing issue, youth issue. But you look at the different ways that the slogans for mobilize the people not directly touch upon those substantial issues. Rather, they're stuck on the identity politics, and for example, for the mobilization and so on and so forth. So that, therefore, it's difficult to find a resolution.
Therefore, it's very, very important to listen at a very early stage, to understand and to listen what the people want.
But what about climate change issue? Can you do it with the absence of a huge player, the United States, one of the biggest emitters in the world?
You have to try, yes. Why not? Better than doing nothing.
I think this is the case, like an environmental issue, is the case to show that the traditional framework of the governance was somehow in crisis, because these issues cannot be dealt with within the boundary of the one nation. So in that sense, we need to find the solution globally.
But when we
So
are
that's
facing
where-
a time, here's the
so
thing,
that's why.
here facing a time that you have an apparent collapse to a certain
Yes,
extent
right.
of the international
That's why.
platforms.
Yeah.
If you look at WTO, that's one thing. I don't want to repeat all the other things that the U.S. withdrew itself from, including from the climate change
But
issue.
in the same time, Asia is moving closer together.
And will
Something new
Asia
appears.
solve, with the Asia solve
Africa
the
is
problem?
moving closer together. African Union is stronger than ever.
So you are saying without U.S., the rest of the world can still do that. Is that what you're trying to say?
We have to try, with or without US. And
What
it's
other
not a
options
question.
do we have?
It's not another question who joining us. It's a question who can I find who has the same ideas I have.
Yeah.
And then I have
Luckily-
to create a coalition.
Luckily, we have localities in the United States that are very active on climate change issues, environmental issues
like in
as well.
California.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that we need to work together as other issues. If other countries, like the European countries, African countries, Asian countries, they can work together to reach certain kind of agreements, then I think that America should deal with that more seriously. I think that created a new environment, international environment.
Momentum, in a way.
Momentum for reach a certain kind of agreement.
Wang Hui, Frank Ziegen, stay with us. We have more to discuss. And you're watching Braving Uncertainties, the World Inside Year-End Special. Still to come on our program. Be it efforts to reach for the moon and the stars, unlocking the power of a quantum chip, or lightning fast mobile connection. Tech and innovation may be our best bet someday. The Soul Solution coming up right in our program. Welcome back. The year 2019 is a year filled with uncertainties, but where there are challenges, there are opportunities. Certainties, a silver lining, can be found amid the dark cloud of global uncertainties. As in other times of history, the dawn of new technology could be the sole solution, some say. For instance, medical advances have improved human health and longevity. Industrial revolutions have pole vaulted human capacities. In the past year alone, mankind achieved new milestones. Here we can see some of them on screen, such as 5G commercialization and the first ever image of a black hole. The world has gone way further down the road of innovation. Let's take a closer look at the sole solution in the year 2019.
A landing on the dark side of the moon for the first time in history, to go where no man has gone before. At the beginning of 2019, China's Chang'e 4 lunar probe softly touched down on the South Pole's Aitken Basin on the far side of the moon. It sent back the first ever image of the dark lunar surface, along with a picture of the lunar rover Yutu-2 while rolling away from the probe. The first glance at a black hole, an image from the vast reaches of space. In April, that image was unveiled, marking a historic breakthrough in astrophysics research. The image reveals the black hole at the centre of the Messier 87, a massive galaxy in the nearby Virgo galaxy cluster, 55 million light-years from Earth, and has a mass 6.5 billion times that of the Sun. The photographer is Event Horizon Telescope, a planet-scale array of 8 ground-based radio telescopes forged through international collaboration. Quantum computing in the offing, a game-changing way of processing data. In October, Google said it achieved a significant breakthrough called quantum supremacy. The company said the quantum computer Sycamore could do a mathematical calculation in around 3 minutes that would take a Summit supercomputer, the most powerful in the world today, 10,000 years. Official confirmation came in a paper published in the science journal Nature. The age of 5G commercialization, a big step in fifth-generation mobile network technology. Consumer 5G launched in certain countries, including China, the US, and the first country to deploy it, South Korea. People can connect to 5G networks with mobile phones, making data transfer lightning fast and easier.
Nowadays, many new technologies such as artificial intelligence and 5G have permeated through daily life. Cross-border competitions in those areas are becoming increasingly fierce. For example, although 5G is widely seen as beneficial to all, Chinese tech giant Huawei still face frequent sanctions in certain countries. What's driving the cutthroat competition? For some answers, we sought wisdom from industry insiders.
人类社会还是要走向一种共同的合作发展，才是一条真正的道路。
I believe collaboration is the only way to make social progress. Economic globalization was first proposed in the West. We believe it is a great concept. There definitely have been and will be ups and downs during the process of economic globalization, and we need to take the right approaches to these ups and downs. That means we need to use laws and rules to reconcile and resolve issues instead of imposing extreme restrictions.
而不是采取一种极端的方法。人类的文明呢，往往是科学家有了发现。
The progress of human civilization is built upon the discoveries and innovations of scientists, the leadership and facilitation of politicians, the products and markets of entrepreneurs, and the joint efforts of all people. That's how we create new wealth. During the Dark Ages, famine was prevalent in Europe. About 40 to 50 years ago, China was very poor, and people suffered from hunger. But now we have an abundance of food. Why is that? It's not because the natural environment has changed much since then. It is the result of advances in science and technology.
就是科学技术的进步，给人类带来了新的幸福。
My interest is open information, open science. I come from a world where what we value isn't so much trade and commerce and stock values. We value knowledge, and we want to build on the people before. And the only way this works is if people are open at the beginning, and we can all build on each other. And that's, to me, the priority. There are other issues, and I'm not denying them, but that's the one I'm focused on. How does the world collaborate? It's not a competitive world in the early stages of science. It benefits from collaboration.
Communication and cooperation should do wonders in speeding up advances in technology and innovation. So it's logical that global governance is needed to lay down the rules and map out strategies for new technologies. Earlier, on the sidelines of this year's World Internet Conference in Wuzhen, two people in the know shared their views about global cooperation in the age of interdependence.
The Secretary General commissioned a high-level panel that was co-led by Jack Ma. We were very fortunate, and Melinda Gates, and brought 20 other leaders in this domain from around the world together to look at how we cooperate better across the world to steer the internet, to make it truly a tool for good, a tool for advancement, a tool for human rights, a tool for development, and contain some of the unintended consequences and malicious uses. We're now in the follow-up stage. We're building multi-stakeholder coalitions around the recommendations, and there's a certain amount of progress, but some of the current geopolitics don't make it easy.
I think the pressing issues are several-fold. The primary one is, in the new era, we call it AI, whereby the main productive capital isn't writing software anymore. It's actually using data to train algorithms. and the fact that we benefit from open source software over the last several decades, how can we work together globally to create a new mechanism, just like the old days open source software, so that more data, while their privacy and economic value can be fully protected, but they can be harnessed together so that engineers from different parts of the economy can leverage each individual's advances, use those as they work on different types of innovations, particularly, as I mentioned, my recent focus is really in the early stage, particularly when companies are very young.
Yeah.
We want to really lower the barrier for them. So through that lens, that's the pressing issue. How can we lower the barrier of innovations for entrepreneurs?
Technology, competition, or cooperation? Still in our studio, Wang Hui and Frank Zihan. Is technology the solution, or is it really the challenge? That's always the question we've been asking throughout this year. What's your answer, Professor Wang?
To some extent, it's a solution, but in most of the cases in the history is a challenge.
Illustrate why you say so.
For example, you see that the transformation of the wars, different wars. Since the 19th century, 20th century, we had huge wars with the advanced technology, military technology, and especially those new innovation of technology easily to be used for the conflicts. Sometimes the military, now the digital conflicts. So it's a big challenge for us. Of course, we also find the part of the solution because it's more convenient. We have the faster train, we have the cell phone, we have the email. Easier for us to communicate for the communication. But even for the communication, we found that the mutual understanding didn't follow up the speed of the innovation of technology improvements. So,
yes, Mr. Zihan.
Yeah. And it's very strange. Whenever a new technology comes, people seem to expect that it only has advantages. And then they're very disappointed about the advantages, and others only see the disadvantages and don't want to have the new technology. When we invented the car in Europe, at the beginning there was a law in Great Britain that you have to have a red flag run in front of the car, that nobody is getting injured. It's very strange. And now with 5G, you have the possibility to have autonomous driving on one side. On the other side, there are loads of data, and they can be misused.
But that's the reality the world has to deal with.
Yes,
but on the other hand, you also see some are trying to take advantage
yeah.
of the differences in attitudes, at least. For example, geopolitics. That's when it comes into being. Take advantage of the weaker points others have in mentality or psychology and play with it. That's the thing that people are really worried about, Professor Wang, particularly about technology. If you look at even 5G, just one example, how geopolitics playing such a huge part in the articulation and the spread of this technology, in the scrutinizing of this technology.
Technology developments are always related to the geopolitical relations. Especially, I think, two things. The one thing is that the thinking of geopolitics was the product of the late 19th century, early 20th century. The big powers, mainly in Europe. But now that kind of the thinking, I think, is out of date. Partly, to some extent, I mean, still dominant the mind.
Explain himself, but go ahead then.
Dominate our mind. But we know that the technology, especially we are living in a digital time, and everything digitalization. Digitalization means the deterritorialization of the traditional form of the state itself as a basic unit for the governance, incapable to deal with such a high-speed developments of that. So in that case, we need to find a certain kind of the common ground to rethink about the relationship. However, all our political thinking, so-called strategic thinking, was shaped by the traditional geopolitical thinking.
And why it's still staying traditional? Because we should not underestimate the power of technology. If you have the technology, you can set the rules. If you can set the rules, to some extent, you can run the world. And therefore, if one country has a technology and the other country doesn't have the technology, they shouldn't do it, but the country who doesn't have the technology try to stop the other country instead of working together.
And they're not only trying to stop the technology,
Yes,
they're also trying to stop technology from spreading from one country to the other countries.
Yes.
And trying to use
just to get
geopolitical
it clear,
power
I
to
don't
do that.
I
know you don't agree with that,
Yeah.
but it's an interesting phenomenon, isn't it? And therefore, do we see that in history? Is this likely to prevent us from further develop together, prevented technologies to become a public and common goods? Frank?
It should be, but real life is unfortunately still different. We stole the trains from the Brits, and then we developed better trains and other technology. So this is how the world goes. And unfortunately, right now we have an American president who is dealing with this kind of matters in a very, very radical way. But I think it is too. This is not a happy world. It's a fight about being the first one. It's a fight about being the stronger one and the better one.
Right. Before we go, New Year resolution from any one of you. Professor Wang.
More dialogue, I think, more communication, and the transformation. Best wishes for New Year.
All right.
I would say the same, and I would add more open dialogue. And more capability of change each other's perspective. We need to learn this in a multipolar world order because it's more complicated.
Thank you so much, from Zihan and Wang Hui.
Thank you.
Happy New Year to the two of you, and certainly to our audience as well. 2019 proved to be a chance, a rare combination of circumstances and events that together pose an extreme difficulty. Indeed, the perfect storm. But that's far from the end of the year story. What counts is how we get back up, rise to challenge, no matter what. The sole solution through advances and innovation, forging a measure of stability despite difficulties. On that note, we're wrapping up Braving Uncertainties, the World Insight Year-End Special. Thanks for tuning in. On behalf of my team here in Beijing, thanks for watching, and see you in the year 2020. Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you. Happy New Year.